take it from there. So John Pilger is a Australian-born, renowned journalist. He's been reporting since the Vietnam War. He's been doing fantastic work. What he said, I borrowed yesterday when I introduced Gideon Levy. What he said, I'm trying to hold up a mirror to my own society. And that he has done regarding the Aboriginal people of Australia, foreign policy regarding the United States, Palestine. There's so many issues where he has had his imprint as a journalist. And almost all of you know him. So again, I think I should just say, I will stop talking and I say, there you go, John.
Thank you. Very, very good to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Well, I'm sorry I'm not with you, but I sort of am. It's a very good topic. Unreported reality. I like it. You know, in the 1970s, I met one of Hitler's leading propagandists, Leni Riefenstahl, whose epic films glorified the Nazis. We happened to be staying in the same lodge in Kenya, where she was on a photography assignment, having escaped the fate of other friends of the Führer. She told me that the patriotic messages of her films were dependent not on orders from above, but on what she called the submissive void of the German public. Did that include the liberal, educated bourgeoisie? I asked her. Yes, she replied, especially them. I think of this as I look around at the propaganda now consuming Western societies. Of course, we're very different from Germany in the 1930s. We live in information societies. We're globalists. We've never been more aware, more in touch, better connected. Is that true? Or do we in the West live in a media society where brainwashing is insidious and relentless, and perception is filtered according to the needs and the lies of state and corporate power? The United States dominates the Western world's media. All but one of the top media companies are based in North America. The internet and social media, Google, Twitter, Facebook, are mostly American-owned and controlled. In my lifetime, the United States has overthrown or attempted to overthrow more than 50 governments, mostly democracies. It has interfered in democratic elections in 30 countries. It has dropped bombs on the people of 30 countries, most of them poor and defenseless. It has attempted to kill the leaders of 50 countries. It has fought to suppress liberation movements in 20 countries. The extent and scale of this carnage is largely unreported, unrecognized, and those responsible continue to dominate Anglo-American political life. In 2005, the playwright Harold Pinter made two extraordinary speeches which broke a silence. US foreign policy, he said, is best defined as follows: kiss my ass or I'll kick your head in. It's as simple and as crude as that. What is interesting about it is that it's so incredibly successful. It possesses the structures of disinformation, use of rhetoric, distortion of language, which are very persuasive, but are actually a pack of lies. It's very successful propaganda. They have the money, they have the technology, They have all the means to get away with it, and they do. In accepting the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2005, Pinter said this: "The crimes of the United States have been systematic, constant, vicious, remorseless, but very few people have actually talked about them. You have to hand it to America. It's exercised a quite clinical manipulation of power worldwide while masquerading as a force for universal good. It's a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis." Pinter was a friend of mine, and possibly the last great political sage, that is, before radical politics were gentrified. I asked him if the hypnosis he referred to was the submissive void described by Leni Riefenstahl. "It's the same," he replied. "It means the brainwashing is so thorough we're programmed to swallow a pack of lies. If you don't recognize propaganda, you accept it as normal and you probably believe it. That's the submissive void." In our systems of corporate democracy, war is an economic necessity, the perfect marriage of government subsidy and profit. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. The day after 9/11, the stock of the war industry soared. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, more bloodshed was coming, great for business. Today, the most profitable wars have their own brand. They call forever wars. Afghanistan, Palestine, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and now Ukraine. All are based on a pack of lies. Iraq is the most infamous with its weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. NATO's destruction of Libya in 2011 was justified by a massacre in Benghazi that didn't happen. Afghanistan was a revenge war for 9/11, whose perpetrators were mostly Saudi. Today, the news from Afghanistan is how evil the Taliban are, not that Biden's theft of $7 billion of the country's bank reserves is causing widespread suffering. Recently, National Public Radio in Washington devoted 2 hours to Afghanistan and 30 seconds to its starving people. At its summit in Madrid in June, NATO adopted a strategy document that militarizes the European continent. And it escalates war with Russia and promotes war with China. It calls for, and I quote, multi-domain warfighting against nuclear-armed peer competitors, unquote. In other words, nuclear war. It says NATO's enlargement has been an historic success. I read that in disbelief. The news from the war in Ukraine is not news, but a one-sided litany of jingoism, distortion, omission. I've reported a number of wars and I've never known such blanket propaganda. In February, the Russians responded to 6 years of killing and criminal destruction in the Russian-speaking region of Donbass on their border with Ukraine. In 2014, the year that war started, the United States had sponsored a coup in Kiev that got rid of Ukraine's democratically elected Russian-friendly president. Before that, year upon year, American missiles were installed in Eastern Europe, aimed at Russia, accompanied by a chorus of lies that they were intended to defend Europe against Iran, and false assurances all the way back to James Baker's promise to Gorbachev in February 1990 that NATO would never expand beyond Germany. Ukraine was to be the front line, and it now is. NATO has effectively reached the very borderland through which Hitler's army stormed in 1941, leaving more than 23 million dead in the Soviet Union. Last December, the Russians proposed a far-reaching security plan for Europe. This was dismissed, derided, or suppressed in the Western media. On 24th of February, Volodymyr Zelensky threatened to develop nuclear weapons unless America armed and protected Ukraine. That seemed to be the last straw. On the same day, Russia invaded, an act of congenital infamy, according to the Western media. The history, the lies, the peace proposals, the solemn agreements on Donbass at Minsk counted for nothing. On 25th of April, the US Defense Secretary General Lloyd Austin flew into Kiev and confirmed that America's aim was to destroy the Russian Federation. The word he used was weaken. America had got the war it wanted, waged by an expendable proxy or pawn. Almost none of this was explained to Western audiences. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is wanton and inexcusable. It is a crime to invade a sovereign country. There are no buts, except one. When did the war in Ukraine begin? According to the United Nations, between 2014 and this year, some 14,000 people were killed in attacks on the Donbass. Many of the attacks were carried out by the Ukrainian National Guard, which is infested with neo-Nazis. Watch an ITV news report from May 2014, as I did the other day, by the veteran reporter James Mates, who was shelled along with civilians in the city of Mariupol by Ukraine's Azov neo-Nazi battalion. At the same time, dozens of Russian-speaking people were burned alive or suffocated in a trade union building in Odessa, besieged by the followers of the fascist Stephen Bandera. The New York Times called these thugs nationalists. The historic mission of our nation in this critical moment, said Andriy Beletsky, founder of the Azov Battalion, is to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade for their survival, a crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen. Since February, a campaign of self-appointed news monitors, mostly funded by the Americans and British, have sought to maintain the absurdity that Ukraine's neo-Nazis don't exist. Unreported reality is disappearing reality. In the space of a decade, China has been transformed in the West from the world's workshop to a new Satan. A long-running dispute over islands in the South China Sea is said to be proof that China has aggressive designs on its region. Much of this propaganda originates in the US and is transmitted through think tanks, such as the notorious Australian Strategic Policy Institute, the voice of the arms industry, and by journalists such as Peter Harter of the Sydney Morning Herald. Airbrushed, left out, are the 400 American military bases that surround most of China, from Australia to the Marshall Islands to Southeast Asia, Japan and Korea. The Japanese island of Okinawa and the Korean island of Jeju are like loaded guns aimed point blank at the industrial heart of China. This noose, a word used by a Pentagon official, is almost never news. Palestine has been willfully unreported for as long as I can remember. To the BBC, there is head-shaking tragedy and the conflict of two narratives. The most brutal, lawless military occupation in modern times is seldom described as such. The stricken people of Yemen are media unpeople, while the Saudis rain down their American cluster bombs with British advisors working alongside the Saudi targeting officers. More than 500,000 children face starvation. This is our brainwashing by omission. It is not new. The First World War was covered up by reporters who were knighted for their compliance. At the height of the slaughter, the editor of the Manchester Guardian, C.P. Scott, confided to Prime Minister Lloyd George, "If people really knew the truth, the war would be stopped tomorrow, but they don't know and can't know." The refusal to see people and events as those in other countries see them is a media virus in the West, as debilitating as COVID. It's as if we see the world through a one-way mirror in which we are moral and innocent and they are not. It is a profoundly imperial view. The history that is a living presence in China and in Russia is never explained and never understood. Putin is Hitler, Xi is Fu Manchu. Epic achievements such as the eradication of abject poverty in China are barely known. How perverse and squalid this is. When will we allow ourselves to understand? Training journalists factory style is not the answer. The wondrous digital tool is a means, not an end, like the one-finger typewriter and the linotype machine. In recent years, some of the best journalists have been eased out of the mainstream. Defenestrated is the word used. The spaces once open to mavericks, journalists who went against the grain, truth-tellers, have closed. The case of Julian Assange is the most shocking. When Julian and WikiLeaks could win readers and prizes for The Guardian, The New York Times, and other self-important papers of record, he was celebrated. When the dark state objected and demanded the destruction of hard drives and the assassination of Julian's character, he was made a public enemy. Vice President Biden called him a high-tech terrorist. Hillary Clinton asked, "Can't we just drone this guy?" The ensuing campaign of abuse and vilification against Julian Assange, Niels Melzer called it mobbing, brought the liberal press to its lowest ebb. We know who they are. I think of them as Vichy journalists. When will real journalists stand up? An inspirational samizdat already exists on the internet. Consortium News, The Grey Zone, Mint News, Media Lens, Declassified, ZNet, Alborada, the work of Chris Hedges, Patrick Lawrence, Jonathan Cook, Diana Johnston, Caitlin Johnston, and others. And when will writers stand up as they did against the rise of fascism in the 1930s? When will filmmakers stand up as they did against the Cold War in the 1940s? When will satirists stand up as they did a generation ago? Having soaked for 82 years in a deep bath of righteousness that is the official version of the last World War, isn't it time those who are meant to keep the record straight declared their independence and decoded the propaganda? The urgency is greater than ever. Thank you.